Saint Faustina described exactly what a tormented soul in purgatory sees and feels when someone on earth prays the chaplet of divine mercy for them. What she saw and wrote down will forever change the way you move your rosary beads. Think about it. How many times have you prayed for a loved one who has passed away? Maybe you do it every day, maybe from time to time, or maybe only in those difficult moments when the pain of loss and longing becomes simply too overwhelming to stay silent. And you've probably never known for sure what exactly happens on the other side of the veil. Does that soul feel anything? Do they know it's you remembering them? Do those repeated words even reach them? The Polish mystic learned the answer. She saw with her own eyes how, in the spiritual realm, this one specific prayer literally strikes the space of purgatory, bringing instant relief. In this video, I will show you exactly how it happens.
Saint Faustina frequently emphasized that the Chaplet of Divine Mercy is an absolutely unprecedented prayer, not because of its length or complicated words. Its power stems from the fact that it is directly anchored in the historical sacrifice of Jesus himself, in his body and blood, in every single grueling step he took while carrying the cross to Golgotha. That is exactly why this seemingly simple prayer possesses a striking power unlike any other. It reaches straight to the infinite source of God's mercy, to the Savior's death, which was offered for absolutely every soul, without exception. The Polish mystic's visions reveal something incredible. The moment you begin to pray the chaplet for a specific deceased person, that soul feels it in the exact same fraction of a second. Not with a delay, not only after you finish 15 minutes later. It happens from the very first sign of the cross and the words, "Our Father." The soul's reaction to this beginning is instantaneous. Faustina described that the tormented soul experiences a phenomenon in purgatory that can only be compared to a sudden wave of warmth in an icy place, to a glaring beam of light that violently slashes through the thickest darkness, to a clear spiritual voice declaring, "Someone remembers you. Someone is standing by your side right now, calling upon God himself to defend you." This first conscious moment charges the soul with a massive dose of strength for the rest of its difficult journey.
Try to imagine it for a moment, being there in the dark, enduring the painful process of purification, burning with a longing for God whom you cannot yet see. And suddenly, in the very midst of that torment, feeling that somewhere on earth a loved one is kneeling and placing Jesus himself between you and divine justice, that someone is pleading by his blood and wounds for rescue, specifically for you. The diary reveals one more deeply moving truth. The soul perfectly recognizes who is praying for them. They know. The spiritual realm has no boundaries. The deceased almost physically hears your voice, and if you pray in silence, they hear the vibrations of your heart. There is no veil on the other side. Your intention, your love, and your fervent longing are read by them like an open book. This sudden spiritual recognition brings the soul unimaginable relief. The earthly love they knew during their life has not died. It has just crossed the boundary of death and descended to them in the form of prayer, saying without words, "I am here, I remember, and I will not leave you alone in this darkness." But Saint Faustina also described precisely what happens to that soul with absolutely every subsequent word of the chaplet, with every repeated invocation of mercy. And this mechanism is even more surprising than the beginning of the prayer. I will tell you about it in the next chapter. Saint Faustina did not describe the chaplet as a one-time static prayer. It is a dynamic series of specific powerful moments. Every movement of a bead and the spoken words, "For the sake of his sorrowful passion, have mercy on us and on the whole world," is a separate strike of God's grace aimed straight into the darkness of purgatory. Mystical writings reveal that the tormented soul feels each of these invocations individually. It is not one general, blurred feeling of warmth. It is a series of very specific, pinpointed touches, as if an invisible hand, step by step, was lifting an unimaginable burden off this soul. One line of the chaplet, one weight lifted. The next line, another chain broken. And so it continues throughout the entire 15 minutes of your prayer. Faustina taught that with every plea to divine mercy, with every reference to his sorrowful passion, the soul experiences something mystical. They see before them one specific moment from the Savior's way of the cross, one painful fall, one heavy blow, one grueling step Jesus took specifically for them. And with each of these images of the suffering Savior, something within that soul breaks forever. Something that had been tangled throughout their earthly life, an old sin, a deep resentment, a hidden fear, or an attachment, simply evaporates with that one invocation. With every passing decade of the chaplet, something else happens. The Savior physically draws closer to that soul. Every invocation you utter is another step he takes in their direction. And when the prayer comes to an end, when the final "Holy God" leaves your lips, Jesus is already beside them, directly. This mystical closeness of Christ, who descended to them called upon by your prayer, is something this soul will never forget, something that permanently and drastically alters their path to heaven. The diary conceals one more absolutely staggering truth. The words, "and on the whole world," are not just a pious addition. They trigger a spiritual shockwave. When you pray the chaplet for your mother, father, or a loved one, that person feels it as something incredibly intimate, a prayer aimed straight at their heart. But in that exact same fraction of a second, all of purgatory, absolutely every suffering soul there, experiences the same prayer. This simultaneity, the fact that one chaplet strikes a specific person directly while simultaneously bathing millions of other souls in light, is one of the miracles that Faustina never ceased to marvel at. However, the diary reveals something none of us would expect. What exactly does Jesus do when he hears the chaplet being prayed by you for a specific deceased person? He doesn't just stand by that soul. He does something much more surprising. And I'll tell you about that in the next chapter. Saint Faustina described in her diary something that is rarely mentioned during sermons on divine mercy. She revealed not only what happens to the tormented soul, but above all, what Jesus himself does. And his reaction is so concrete, so personal, and so drastically different from our human ideas of a distant and indifferent God that it's impossible to pass by without being deeply moved. From the visions of the Polish mystic, it is clear, when someone on earth begins to pray the chaplet for a specific soul, Jesus literally stands up. This is not merely a beautiful metaphor. He stands up exactly how a person reacts when someone very important to them cries out for help. Faustina described that Christ, who dwells in the eternal glory and love of the Holy Trinity, directs all his divine attention to that one specific soul in that exact second. He hears your prayer completely differently than the thousands of other daily requests. Why? Because the chaplet is his own prayer. It was woven from the words he himself dictated to Faustina. When you speak them, Jesus hears them in the afterlife like an echo of his own voice, like something that came straight from his heart and is now returning to him as a plea to rescue someone who desperately needs it. In response to this prayer, the Savior takes concrete action. He steps into the breach between divine justice and that very soul. He stands as their absolute defender, as their personal advocate, saying, "This soul belongs to me. Someone on earth is appealing to my bloody passion. Grant this request." Faustina wrote that God the Father, who looks upon his Son with infinite love, simply cannot refuse him. He does not reject what Jesus brings in his wounded hands. The intercessory prayer of the Son ensures that the mercy pouring down upon the soul surpasses anything the human mind could ever comprehend. The mystic perfectly understood this spiritual mechanics. That is precisely why she prayed the chaplet so often, in every free moment, with such burning zeal. She was absolutely certain that every invocation was another physical step Jesus took toward a tormented soul, and that none of those steps are ever in vain. The diary, however, brings massive relief to those who find praying the chaplet difficult. To those who struggle with distractions, whose minds wander, or who simply fall asleep from exhaustion with the rosary in their hand, the Savior conveyed something to Faustina that will instantly lift that guilt off your shoulders. From the diary of Saint Faustina comes a powerful comfort for any of us who struggle with the feeling that our prayer is simply too weak, too distracted, too imperfect. You think to yourself, my thoughts are wandering all over the place. I mess up the words. I lack focus. I don't feel that fervor. And at the end comes that familiar whisper. This chaplet of yours is worthless. Faustina answers this fear with full force and without a shadow of a doubt. That is a lie. God does not judge technique. God looks at the intention of the heart, and a chaplet prayed with distraction but with love is always heard by him, without a single exception. The Polish mystic explains that in the spiritual world there is a gigantic difference between distraction born of arrogance and indifference and distraction that is simply human weakness. If you kneel in your room with a rosary in your hands, have a sincere intention, really try to focus, but despite your best efforts, exhaustion takes over and your thoughts drift, you are doing something God will never ignore. Why? Because you chose to kneel. You chose to pick up that rosary. You made a decision to start. That decision to pray despite being exhausted after a hard day, despite a racing mind, is read in heaven as a pure act of love. That love, though trembling, uncertain, and full of gaps, is instantly accepted and instantly turns into saving grace for the soul you are asking for. From the diary of Saint Faustina comes a powerful comfort for any of us who struggle with the feeling that our prayer is simply too weak, too distracted, too imperfect. You think to yourself, my thoughts are wandering all over the place. I mess up the words. I lack focus. I don't feel that fervor. And at the end comes that familiar whisper. This chaplet of yours is worthless. Faustina answers this fear with full force and without a shadow of a doubt. That is a lie. God does not judge technique. God looks at the intention of the heart, and a chaplet prayed with distraction but with love is always heard by him, without a single exception. The Polish mystic explains that in the spiritual world there is a gigantic difference between distraction born of arrogance and indifference and distraction that is simply human weakness. If you kneel in your room with a rosary in your hands, have a sincere intention, really try to focus, but despite your best efforts, exhaustion takes over and your thoughts drift, you are doing something God will never ignore. Why? Because you chose to kneel. You chose to pick up that rosary. You made a decision to start. That decision to pray despite being exhausted after a hard day, despite a racing mind, is read in heaven as a pure act of love. That love, though trembling, uncertain, and full of gaps, is instantly accepted and instantly turns into saving grace for the soul you are asking for. Saint Faustina's diary describes the moment the chaplet concludes in a deeply moving way. It is not just setting the rosary on the table and abruptly breaking the spiritual connection. It is a moment that leaves something absolutely permanent in the afterlife. the mystic wrote that the soul you just offered this prayer for is in a completely different spiritual state after its completion than they were 15 minutes prior. They are lighter, they are one step closer to God, and most importantly, they gain a powerful internal certainty that their torment will soon come to an end. What changed within them during the praying of the chaplet, the burden that was lifted, the soothed pain, and the tangible closeness of the Savior who came to them, all of that does not disappear with the sign of the cross. It stays with them. It is like an indelible luminous mark fused into their being, like a new strength that endures. Faustina used a simple yet powerful image. She wrote that every single chaplet offered for the deceased is like a luminous brick of grace in the spiritual world. It may seem small, but it is painfully real. These spiritual bricks, each one whispered with distraction, with exhaustion, but also with great love, form a concrete path, a bridge leading the soul straight into the arms of God. By praying the chaplet for someone who has passed, you are literally building this path, piece by piece, prayer by prayer, year after year. The Polish mystic teaches that when this soul finally crosses the threshold of heaven and stands face to face with the Creator, their eyes will suddenly be opened. They will see every single one of those bricks. They will recognize absolutely every prayed chaplet. They will see the face of every person who fought for them on earth. Realizing how a gigantic wave of love followed them throughout their entire journey of purification is a moment of absolute, indescribable emotion for a soul newly born into heaven. They clearly see they did not walk alone, that someone on earth remembered them, that someone knelt for them, that someone moved the beads week after week, year after year. They realized that every one of those whispered prayers was an essential rescue, for they could not have shortened their purgatory by even a second on their own. Their gratitude toward you becomes eternal in that moment. And this beautiful feeling leads us straight to the grand finale, because the Savior conveyed through Faustina an absolute, undeniable promise for everyone on earth who prays the chaplet for their deceased. A promise that applies not only to the saved soul, it directly applies to you. Saint Faustina concluded her teachings on the chaplet with a promise. Remarkably, it is not a promise for the soul you are praying for. It is a promise directly for you, for the one who kneels, for the one who picks up the rosary, for the one who, despite exhaustion, a flood of thoughts, and momentary doubts of whether it makes any sense at all, still prays this prayer. The Polish mystic recorded the words she heard from Jesus himself. Whoever recites this chaplet will receive great mercy at the hour of their own death. This prayer, which you offer for others with such difficulty today, flawlessly returns to you. By moving these beads, you are building a bridge not only for a suffering soul, you are building a powerful rescue for yourself, for that one final moment when you yourself will need God's mercy the most. And this grace at the hour of death is promised by Jesus, clearly, specifically, and without the condition of being perfect, to everyone who prays it. Faustina wrote that this spiritual reciprocity is one of the most beautiful truths of all Christianity. The love you give always returns. The prayer you offer for others returns to you, not as a payment you have earned, but as a natural fruit of love. Because love in the spiritual realm is like a powerful river that flows in both directions simultaneously. Whoever prays for others will be remembered by God on the day when they no longer have the strength to ask. When the mystic imagined this moment, the hour of death of a person who prayed the chaplet for their deceased loved ones throughout their life, she saw Jesus himself by their bed, standing incredibly close, as a ruthless defender, speaking to divine justice. This soul knew me. This soul spent years pleading for others through my bloody passion. Now I am with them. Such a presence of the Savior at the hour of death is a gift whose gigantic value you will not measure until your own final day arrives. Therefore, pray it. For your mother, for your father, for a spouse, for those who left too early and whom you miss so much. Pray it today. and tomorrow, and a year from now, because every whispered chaplet returns, and every one is a luminous brick not only on the path of the saved soul, it is also a brick on your own path toward him. Saint Faustina wanted you to understand one thing. The chaplet is not just a pious tradition. It is not a formula you recite simply because it's the right thing to do. It is a bridge, a tangible, spiritual bridge between you and your loved ones who have passed away. A bridge that you personally build with every single prayer, and which reaches where your human hands can no longer grasp. Pray the chaplet today for someone you love and who has passed into eternity. Say their name out loud right before the first sign of the cross, and have absolute certainty that this tormented soul will feel it, from the very first word. Leave that name in the comments under this video as well, so they become part of our shared prayer and are remembered here. Subscribe to this channel so you don't miss our upcoming videos where we uncover the greatest mysteries of the spiritual world. And if our content brings you hope and you want to help us create more, we would be eternally grateful for any support through the support option here on YouTube. God bless and see you soon.